So typically 70% of people have at least one feature of burnout. 72% of people are struggling with stress. And approximately that same number have said that the past several years have been the most stressful of their entire professional careers.
What's happening?
A couple of things are happening. So going back to my own personal stress story, why did I have those palpitations? At night, as I was going to bed, I was developing something called a delayed stress reaction. And what happens is, under periods of acute stress, like the recent events that we've all endured collectively as a global whole, during acute periods of stress, we shore up our internal reserves. As a human being, you often do not crack in that moment. You keep it together at all costs. I've seen this with my cancer patients. They have a cancer diagnosis and they go through the treatment, radiation, chemotherapy, all of it, and they are fine. They do not shed a tear. Then when they get that first clean bill of health from their doctors, they are in my office sobbing. And everyone is confused. Why now? What's going on now? Same thing with all of us. You may be feeling this way. I may be too. Right now, it's that feeling of like, okay, we've just lived through the pandemic. We should be celebrating. I'm sure you've seen every headline over the past several years, at least I did. The roaring 20s are coming, the post-pandemic era. The Guardian had a great piece on this. And I remember seeing headline upon headline, and I would just laugh because I would think that is not how the brain works. The reason we are all feeling very much not the roaring 20s is because our brains are built like dams. So what happens is when you are going through a period of stress, you shore up your internal reserves and you keep it together at all costs. That is just how the brain is built. When that acute period of stress is over, so in a cancer patient, the actual cancer treatment, for me as a medical resident going through, the difficult 30-hour work shift and going to bed, and for all of us collectively going through the pandemic experience and the various things that have happened since, we keep it together. But when we have that moment of respite, when that acute stressor is over, then our psychological defenses come down and our true emotions can emerge. And it's often a deluge. And it comes out in different ways. The manifestations of stress are different. But it's this delayed stress response. We are all feeling it, which is why none of us feel like it's the roaring 20s. We are seeing increased rates of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, stress-related disorders, and a general feeling of malaise or fatigue or burnout now, even more than we were back in 2020 or 2021. It's the delayed stress reaction.
What is stress? We should probably define that word. And I'd also like to try and define it against the word burnout. Are they different things? Are they the same thing? Do either of them exist?
Great question. There is a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Under normal circumstances, we function in resilient mode, and we're governed by the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain, if you put your hand here, right behind the forehead. Mm-hmm. And it is the part of your brain that is responsible for, in scientific terms, we call it general executive function, or, layman's terms, adulting.
God, mine's huge.
Behind the skull.
Okay.
Memory, planning, organization. This is what our strategic thinking. You're really good at these things, Stephen.
Thank you so much.
The prefrontal cortex is what governs all of that. Under stress, we are governed not by the prefrontal cortex, but by the amygdala. And the amygdala is a tiny almond-shaped structure deep in our brains. You can't touch it. It's not like the prefrontal cortex right behind here. It's like between your ears, deep down. And that is our emotional center. It's the limbic system. And we often call it the reptilian brain because that part of our brain has not evolved the way other parts of our brain have. So it's that, and the response that amygdala creates is the fight or flight response, that stress response in our bodies. So under acute stress, we are not governed by the prefrontal cortex up here. We are governed by our amygdala. Our brains and our bodies are expertly designed to manage acute stress. We are built for managing stress. However, nowadays, so for example, let's talk a little bit about the fight or flight response that the amygdala governs, right? Back when we were all cave people, we were in the forest, we saw a tiger. You would either flee or fight. And there's all of these bodily mechanisms that happen when you are engaged in the fight or flight response. Your heart beats faster. Your lungs start taking in more oxygen. Blood is shunted away from your vital organs and it goes to your muscles. So you can either fight or you can run. Your pupils dilate. There's so many biological, physiological mechanisms that happen with the fight or flight response. Then when that acute threat is over, so you either have fought or you have flown away from the tiger, you have a moment to recalibrate. Modern day times, there are no acute threats anymore. All of our tigers are chronic. Bills, financial troubles, marital conflicts or relationship problems, health issues. So there's this constant low hum of that fight or flight response in the distance. And that is the problem. So acute stress, we are good at. Our brains and bodies are great at managing.
And it
Chronic
serves a role, right?
Of course it serves a role. It's evolutionarily healthy. And we can talk about the differences between healthy stress and unhealthy stress. But when it starts becoming chronic, that is when burnout sets in. Your brain doesn't get time to rest or recharge. It's not like a tiger in the forest where you fight, flee, and then there's like a respite time. So it's just ongoing in the background at a low hum at all times.
What are the symptoms of burnout then? How do I know if I'm burnt out?
The interesting thing about burnout is that the definition is changing. So earlier, when you think about burnout, you know what someone with burnout has, or you might yourself might think like, oh, I know what burnout is. I don't have it. That's a lot of people feel this way. Classic, typical symptoms of burnout: apathy, lethargy, feeling unproductive, not very motivated. And the WHO in 2019 designated burnout as an occupational phenomenon and a clinical syndrome, which was really validating for many people who are feeling that way. This is 2019, way before the pandemic. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, what burnout is looking like has changed. So it is no longer these classic, typical symptoms. Now we are seeing increasingly atypical features of burnout. In one study, 60% of people with burnout had an inability to disconnect from work as their main feature of burnout. So it's not what you think when you're thinking about the face of burnout of someone who's really not interested in work. You could be that person who is engaged in work and can't shut off, and you're thinking to yourself, this can't be burnout. I'm totally, engaged in work. In fact, I can't shut off my brain. You might be experiencing atypical burnout.
Atypical burnout. Because, when I think of burnout, I think of like not getting out of bed and losing motivation. But you're telling me that my addiction to work might be a symptom and a sign of being burnt out.
That's right.
So how do I know? Because I'm addicted to my work. I love my work.
You know when it is different from your baseline. Being addicted to work, you love your work, yes, but you also make time for sleep.
Yeah.
Relationships and connections with loved ones.
Yeah.
You feel a sense of engagement in the world. Mm-hmm. It is not interfering with your day-to-day life, so to speak.
Okay.
So when you are feeling that sense of inability to unplug, that means you're checking your phone multiple times per night because you feel like you have to keep up. You are trying to keep up in the hamster wheel situation where you just can't. Mm-hmm. And so there are many manifestations of this atypical burnout, but that is one. And so often what's happening now is that people are feeling burnt out. Again, unprecedented rise, right? In stress, chronic stress, and burnout. And often people don't recognize that it's happening to them simply because the face and definition of burnout is changing.
How many people are burnt out? Do they know? Have they done any studies on that to figure out what that number is?
We don't know. I mean, it depends on the sector. So there are lots of studies on burnout. And so one big study was done on parental burnout and found that 2/3 of parents have burnout.
2/3? Jesus, 66%.
2/3. Yeah. And that is probably underestimated and certainly underreported. So typically we're seeing anywhere rates from 60 to 70% of people note burnout. But again, think about, if you based on what we've talked about, if you are feeling like I'm not burnt out. So if you're self-reporting burnout and you're saying, I don't really feel burnt out. I'm very engaged in my work. In fact, I check my email 10 times a night. You could actually be having burnout. There's also a lot of stigma and shame around burnout. So people don't want to come forward and say, hey, I might be stressed or I might have burnout.
If I have that atypical burnout, why does it matter?
It matters because your brain and your body deserve a rest. And to function optimally, you need to have spaciousness. to function optimally, you need to have rest. And when you feel that sense of burnout, you are not thriving.
What if I don't feel it? What if I'm one of those people that you just said that's, checking my emails 15 times a night? I seem to be successful in my work. I'm kind of out of balance in my life. I don't really have anything else going on in my life. I'm just work. But I don't necessarily feel like there's anything wrong. So if I don't feel like there's anything wrong, if I'm successful in my work, then what is the case for making a change?
So I've had lots of patients. I had a clinical practice in Boston.
Yeah.
And what you're describing is the, young entrepreneur. So many patients who are young entrepreneurs. And the question I would always ask them is, what's your end game? So is it a sprint or a marathon? Are you looking to do this for 2 years and you love it and then that's it? You're going to cash out? Or do you want to think about what your life is going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now? And so they would think about it, ponder, and then say, yeah, I want to spend time. My end game is that I want to lead a great life and I want to live until I'm 75 or until I'm 100. And so if you are on this fast track that you're describing, burnout is not conducive with this idea of longevity and having that long life.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking of case studies that I know of people that I think probably check their email 15 times a night and are like that. And those that are out of balance, I think, as you say, you can do that intensity, but you can't do it consistently. Like, it's possible to be that intense, but it's not sustainable. And it doesn't allow you to achieve the other things that life can offer you that will make you happy. There's no way of being like that and having like a healthy relationship with your family, building a family, staying in shape and all those other things. And that for me is the really clear cost to that is you just play it out, zoom out on your life. In 10 years time, something's going to be broken. Something's
got to give. We don't have, I think that's a good segue into this idea of toxic resilience. It's like we don't all have, human beings, we don't have an unlimited amount of bandwidth. There is a discrete amount of bandwidth that we all have, mental and physical. And so if you are not getting the proper rest that you need and you're not sleeping as much as your body and brain need, and it's not about you as in personal, I don't need sleep, I only need 4 hours. I've also had many patients who've said that to me. But your brain and your body do physiologically and biologically need a certain amount of rest simply for the cellular function to continue.
But we've got those posters up in our kitchens, not my kitchen, obviously, but some people have their posters up in their house, the keep calm, carry on. That's like a hallmark of society today, is to just tough it out and carry on. And we're praised for that. We're praised for our resiliency. Resilience is a good thing, right?
Beautifully said. Keep calm and carry on. Resilience, the true scientific definition of resilience, is our innate biological ability to adapt, recover, and grow in the face of life's challenges. But resilience doesn't function in a vacuum. You need stress for resilience to show itself. Without stress, there can be no resilience. So think of swimming. The swim instructor is the stress saying, like, you can make it to the other side. And your resilience is what keeps your head up as you're swimming while your arms are flailing. And then with time and practice, it gets better. What you're describing, keep calm and carry on, is a manifestation of hustle culture. And our entire modern society is built on this idea of toxic resilience. And so what is toxic resilience? You have heard the word resilience over your lifetime, and you had no real charge, right? Like you would listen to that word and it would be like, okay, fine. And over the past several years, specifically 2020, 2021, it was used. It was like a real buzzword at the start of our quarantine. We're resilient. We're going to get through this. And it has been misused. And this is because of corporations and large companies said, you can work more. You're working from home now. Take on an extra project. You're resilient. It doesn't matter that you're doing childcare and working. You're resilient. And so you hear these toxic messages all of the time. Resilience went from being something that's true, which is honoring your boundaries, making space and time for rest and to recharge, focusing on a sense of self-compassion, and understanding that you are a human being with limitations. That is true resilience. Toxic resilience is productivity at all costs, a mind over matter mindset, and what many of us think of as true resilience is in fact toxic resilience. We are taught from a very young age that dealing with discomfort and being okay with discomfort is what resilience is all about. And I am here to debunk that, because absolutely not. Resilience is our innate biological ability, but it also needs rest and recovery. It is not meant to be toxic.
But being resilient, is that a good thing in your view? Being a resilient person?
Being
Not in the
a
biological
resilient
context. I mean, being psychologically resilient.
Being resilient is an excellent thing to be. It is something that we can learn how to be better at. And yes, true resilience is wonderful. The challenge right now is that many of us hear the word resilience and we bristle at it. I do. When I hear, the messaging of toxic resilience, no one calls it toxic resilience when they're giving you that messaging. They just say, hey, it's the resilience. It's cringeworthy, right? Like you hear it like, oh, be more resilient. And so, yes, true resilience is a gift. It is our innate biological ability. We all have the power and the aptitude for true resilience. But toxic resilience is what we often see and what is often promoted. And that is something that needs to stop.
Do you think people are getting more or less resilient with the nature of the way that the world is? I often have the conversation about whether, the boomer generation are more or less resilient than the Gen Z or whatever's coming next. What's next? Is it like Alpha? I think it's Generation Alpha. These new generations. And the stereotypical argument is that because the boomer generation were working in factories and mines and they were doing harder labor and they had less comparison because they didn't have social media and they didn't see, their mate down the road having a chock-a-frock latte yata during their lunch break and doing yoga sessions, whatever, then they are more resilient. And the Gen Zs, they got it easy. They're all doing breath work and yoga for 6 hours a day. Is that true?
I would say no, because we know that with Gen Z and other younger populations, we're seeing a rise in mental health, burnout, stress like we've never seen before. And I don't think it's because they're quote unquote less resilient. They are managing lots and lots of onslaughts. They've lived through something really awful. They've had a sense of collective trauma. Their minds are still young. They haven't had that lived experience of, decades of going through stuff. So no, I don't think so. And of course, the older generation is going to say that. I remember when I was in my medical training, people would say, 80 hours, it's all you're working? Because we worked 120 hours because there was some reform in terms of like how many hours we could work as medical residents. And 80 hours felt awful to me. And so I think it's important to validate and normalize people's difficult experience. And it's not about what happened to you, so in this example about prior generations, it's about helping people feel a sense of validation, because if you need to name it to tame it. And so, for example, when you are going through a difficult experience, like a young person, there's such a rise of anxiety, depression, stress-related conditions, sleep disorders, mental health challenges, physical health challenges in the younger population. It's not because they're not resilient. It's because they're living in a hyper-connected world, and that is causing all sorts of issues down the road for them, both mental health and physical health. So I reject this idea that the older generation was more resilient. They had less stimulation, and they had, different challenges. But I think it's important to normalize and validate the difficult experience that people are having.
I want to go through your book now, which is called The 5 Resets, which is released January 2024. Very exciting. Which really aims to take on how we deal with stress, how we manage stress. There's sort of shades of neuroplasticity and how we can change our responses to stress. But I guess this first question about the canary in the coal mine, why did you write about that? What's that got to do with stress?
It has everything to do with stress, because stress is something that is so individualized. And that's something that we were talking about earlier, right? Like some people who feel a sense of stress have physical manifestations. Like I had palpitations, you had palpitations, someone else might have headaches, neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain, GI upset, gastrointestinal issues, dizziness, fatigue, sleep problems, irritability, anger. The list goes on and on. It's like never-ending list. And the canary in the coal mine is my way of personally it's my way of really explaining this idea of the physical manifestations of stress. So my canary in the coal mine was palpitations.
What is that phrase? I've never heard the phrase, the canary in the coal mine. Well, I've heard the phrase before, but I've just kind of been one of those people that pretends they know what it means.
The canary in the coal mine is a historical reference. Back when there were coal miners, they would bring a canary, a bird, down into the mines with them. The bird would sing its canary song. When the air got bad, the workers were just working, right? Like 12-hour days and continued to work. When the air got bad, the canary would stop singing. They were in their mode. They didn't understand, they weren't paying attention. And when the canary stopped singing, that was the first tell that the air is bad, before any physical or mental health ramifications for the workers. And so the coal miners, when they stopped hearing the canary song, they would leave the mine with the canary, and it was the first tell of something going awry. And so everyone has a canary within them that tells them a signal, a song that is telling them that there is something happening with their stress. I didn't pay attention to it. It took the palpitations to occur every single night for 2 weeks before I sat up and took notice. All of the physical manifestations of stress that I've mentioned, of course you need to see a doctor, like you and I did, got the full workup and been told stress is often what we call a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning you rule out any organic problems and then you say, okay, this is because of stress. So seeing your doctor and getting that full workup is important. I have to say that as a medical professional because I believe in the medical system and I'm part of the medical system. And so the canary in the coal mine is this idea that we all have a song, a stress song, and our body is trying to tell us something. And understanding that canary symptom for you, it takes a little time to dig through, but once you kind of figure it out, then you can use that. We all have our Achilles heel of something that is the tell. So if you have a medical condition like, say, peptic ulcer disease, that's easy to understand. You feel like, oh, I have stomach pain. And so I can't eat certain foods and I need to take care of myself and there'll be a flare and then you manage that symptom and it goes away. And you know what that tell is of peptic ulcer disease, stomach pain. But for stress, often things are happening to your body and you're not even aware of what that physical manifestation is. That's not to say that it's, your headaches are caused by stress, but they're certainly worsened by stress. So when you have a certain symptom happening to your body, understanding that, hey, that could be my canary song.
I think everybody intuitively knows what their canary is. I think everybody knows what theirs is. I've got a bunch of different ones. Whenever I'm stressed, and I don't even know when I'm stressed, but I don't know why, but I don't know consciously that I'm stressed, but certain things start to happen. I have this really weird one where on my tongue, I'll get a little bit of not like an ulcer. It kind of feels like I've got a spot on my tongue. I get that whenever I'm stressed. My skin gets worse. So I get like spots on my face when I'm stressed. There's a few of them. I'll get a cold pretty much exclusively when I'm stressed, which happens about once every 6 months or so. I think generally I manage stress well, but I'm not immune. I once upon a time thought I was immune. I thought stress and all these other things and mental health all happened to other people. Turns out it happens to me too.
That's right.
And I think I really pushed myself for a good 5, 6, 7, 10 years. I was the CEO of a company that had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of employees. And I was 25, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So I pushed myself very hard. And I think for the first couple of years, I withstood it. But then as time went on, I was not able to outrun the inevitable.
And that's that resilience myth, that like resilient people don't get burned out. It can't be me. Of course I'm not stressed. Someone like me couldn't even fathom being stressed. And I have seen thousands of people who have said that very thing. I said the exact same thing during my stress struggle. Stress doesn't happen to people like me.
You don't want to admit it either, because there's an element of it where you go, I don't want to be fucking weak. I don't want to be the weak person. If I'm experiencing stress or I'm burnt out, then that makes me inadequate in some way. So I don't want to talk about that, But I think I've been a victim of that, like that pride, that ego, especially as like a man and like a CEO and all of those things that are stereotypically, toxically associated with strength. I've never wanted to admit that I was stressed, ever. I don't think I've ever actually said the word to anybody, but I've definitely been stressed. And I know because my body told me, and it tells me in a very predictable way, that canary stopped singing. So I just think that's important because
It's your mind-body connection. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It's like gravity. It's all around you. It's working in the background all the time. And then suddenly you start paying attention and it's like, oh my God.
And on that point of it feeling like evidence of your inadequacy, it's actually evidence that you're a human, that you're perfectly normal, that you're not broken, versus this idea that it's evidence that you're broken.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
Really, just
have you listened to this
beautifully
podcast before? I'm joking.
I am
I'm joking.
For the record, testing, 1, 2, 3. I am a avid fan of this podcast, and I have listened countless times. And this is the one podcast I regularly listen to